You know, when President Cyril Ramaphosa wants to emphasize the importance of an issue, he calls it a burning platform. Well, in this current context, there are many burning platforms. As a result, you have the infrastructure, the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Commission. You've got a commission that is looking at the pledges that were made at the Jobs Summit and whether or not those are being implemented. You've got commissions and committees looking at issues around gender-based violence and so on and so on. So many are these committees and commissions. How do you then track to make sure that the work of these commissions and committees is actually coordinated and it leads to results that are implementable? My guest tonight, that's his job. Busani Ngcaweni is the head of analysis and policy at the Presidency. He joins me this evening. Welcome to the State of Play. All right, Busani, thank you so much for coming through, and I really appreciate your time. So, as I was saying, you've got the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Commission, you've got the commission that's looking at the pledges made at the Jobs Summit, you've got a plethora of these. And I suppose it's your task to ensure that these are coordinated, not only in terms of the tasks that each and every, area of the presidency and government has to perform, but also across the spheres of government. How hard is it with so many crises that you are responding to?
Well, no, thanks for the invitation. Well, it's I would say it's difficult, but also it's manageable because there is a method to it. So the president's view is a very basic one, that when you're doing public policy, you've got to have the evidence for it. So we are organizing and rearranging the system such that the policies that are implemented by government are driven by evidence, not by emotion or a hunch, but there's got to be evidence that supports the reason why we are driving such a particular policy. Secondly, his emphasis is that when you implement public policy, you require compacts. So which means you must mobilize with the sectors concerned and such that when you implement policy, you don't have challenges where we are implementing policy that will be resisted by the very same people to whom policy has to impact on. So he drives compact. So when he mobilizes summits, it's not summits for the sake of just gatherings. Yeah. But so that there is a compact behind a particular policy decision that is taken.
So this whole idea of a social compact being a broader compact, but also various other compacts that are sector-specific.
Exactly. So let me give you an example. So last year he said we must, come up with a new industrial strategy that reimagines how we organize industrial policy in South Africa. So we went ahead and did that. When the reimagined industrial policy was adopted by a cabinet last year, he then argued that for each of the subsectors of the economy that have been identified to be part of the reimagined industrial strategy, there's got to be a compact. We then had to go back, led by DTI, into the drawing board and work with each of the subsectors identified. So, for example, with the poultry sector, both the importers and the exporters of poultry and other people in the value chain, the poultry master plan has now been completed, and the people who are signing on it is those who are involved in the entire value chain of the poultry industry. The problem is if you implement policy, like industrial policy in particular, and you identify a sector like tourism and say you want to increase tourism numbers by 20%, yet we have not spoken to the industry concerned, then we're not driving a compact-driven policy.
But do we have the luxury of time, Busani, to engage in, envisioning processes that, policy formulation invariably involves in times of crises? Are we not at a point where pragmatism trumps ideas about, envisioning and the luxury of, we're looking at 5 to 10 years by way of policy rolling itself out?
Well, my DG was reminding us today that we cannot have a Medupi model of planning public policy, where you start by building a power station and you then plan later. We can no longer afford to have that. So in as much as it may take time, it may take a month, it may take 2 months, but once a decision is made, it must be evidence-driven. The sectors involved must support it. There has to be resources, and you must have a clear execution plan, even if it means taking another 6 weeks to achieve that. If you have a Medupi type of planning, the cost of it will be, too costly to contemplate. In fact, in project management, there's an adage that says problems downstream are a consequence of neglect upstream. So we can no longer do that anymore. We've got to plan. There has to be that discipline of projecting and taking a long-term view. And you must implement with a clear execution modalities such that you limit the possibilities of making the kind of mistakes we have made.
One of the ingredients you mentioned in that recipe for successful policy formulation and implementation is the issue of resources. And right now you find yourself in a situation where practically you're dealing with a situation where the resources are simply not there, and we are seeing some contradictions certainly within the cabinet. I mean, this whole idea of Fikile Mbalula being upset, for example, that his budget for PRASA was being cut, is actually being cut in the medium term by the finance minister, but also this whole idea around NHI, that you are announcing as the presidency and government that this is the direction we are going, but you're having to cut back on expenditure on those things. Yeah. So these resources, how much of a factor are they in some of the policy decisions that you are making?
Yeah. Well, resources are a problem, but let me just explain a bit how the budget process works. Number one, on the issue of cutting on PRASA, the budget, as was read by the Minister of Finance, is a cabinet decision.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the issue of consultation, my budget was cut, the Presidency budget was cut, so are the budgets of many other departments because of the fiscal situation we are in. So the budget, as was read by Minister Ngcaweni, was a decision of the executive. That's the first thing. Secondly, on the program that the state has to implement, obviously there must be prioritization. There is nowhere, for example, on the budget where it talks about cutting, social spending on spending on health, spending on education, or spending on social grants, for example, because under the current socio-economic environment, it is important that you consolidate the gains you have made.
No, there is a point where those are being cut in the medium term.
Yeah, well, look, there is, but what is the issue is about the quality of expenditure. So one of the interventions amongst many that are being worked on now is around looking at the machinery of government and how we are able to implement. And I'll give you one example of that. There are departments in state that spend money hiring a senior advocate for a basic disciplinary matter in a department of a fellow who decided to steal a stapler. The stapler that costs 30 rands, and they go and hire a senior counsel and pay 25,000 rands to chair a disciplinary hearing of a fellow who drove a car for 5 kilometers more, when you could simply just discipline it. So when you talk about changing the machinery of the state, it means, which is where the issue of capacity building comes in. We must rebuild the capacity of the state such that the people who've got legal qualifications who work in government, they must be competent enough for them to draft legal heads of argument, for them to appear in court and to preside over such cases as a case of a fellow who steals a stapler and you hire a senior counsel to preside.
Let's come back to something you shared just recently around the talented 10th, where you were talking about the civil servant, the cohort of civil servant that we want in South Africa. Basically, people who are committed to a vision and people who dedicate themselves to the public service, as opposed to instances where that doesn't necessarily happen all the time.
Yeah. Look, there's a lot of young people in the state, junior and also senior, who are very enthusiastic and capable. What we require is to build an enabling environment for them to thrive. Let me give you an example. In the Department of Trade and Industry, they've built a system called Biz Portal, where within 24 hours or even less, you can apply for start a business, you register with SARS, and now they're working on interoperability with the systems of the Department of Labor, so you can register with the Compensation Fund, UIF, and so on. The system as it works now is built by young people which they're employed out of universities, they've trained them and they're able to build such a system. There is many other examples like that, so you must change how the talent is managed within the state. You must provide training, capacity training where training is required. And people must feel proud to work in a government and that they can issue their business cards. You will recall, Thulasizwe, There was time in the history of this country, in fact, maybe a decade or so ago, where people who work in Home Affairs, even senior managers, would not give their business cards out because they were scared that they were like a skunk of people who work in the public service. And today they can issue their business cards because they know if you apply for a passport, you'll get it within 2 weeks.
So how do you hope to change that in your next role? Because from policy, heading up the policy unit in the presidency, you're going to be the principal of the National School of Government. And I saw a lot of people teasing you and calling you principal, which is the appropriate title for what you're going to do. How exactly are you going to do this?
There's few things we are going to introduce. We will be targeting at various levels. One, we have to target at entry level the targets, in fact, the cadets. In fact, very soon there will be a new ministerial determination that gives instruction on the compulsory training for people in the public service. That's just but one of those steps that are going to be implemented. But as part of the idea of professionalizing the public service, and I'll give an example here, you have to make sure that people like engineers who work for government, you can't have someone with an engineering qualification, but is not a member of the Engineering Council of South Africa. What that means is that the person, all they do is then they manage tenders. Each time there is a project they are working on, they must hire a consultant outside who's going to sign on the design plan and so on. No, we must change that. Just like in legal services. People who work in legal services in government must be attorneys, they must be advocates, they must be competent enough to draft, heads of argument, and they must appear in court on certain matters.
What about cadre deployment, though? Because, I mean, that's much debated, and people usually say, well, it happens everywhere around the world. If you go into government, you need to, take along with you people that are oriented in the direction of attaining the goals, who share your vision and your goals, to further that. How do you balance that then?
There's a lot of
with the professionalization.
There's a lot of competent cadres out there. Even if you do cadre deployment, there's got to be fit for purpose. So you can't just take me, being me, and think, well, because you know me, you are familiar with me, and you want to take me to become a Director General of National Treasury. Because I'm going to kill the department because I have no clue. My knowledge of how to manage public finances is different from the people who work there. So when you do cadre deployment, there has to be, number one, fit for purpose. Secondly, there must be continuous capacity building. My view, Thulas, is just as it happens in many other sectors of the economy, public servants must become like pilots. They must become like cabin crew. They must go back to the simulator all the time because flying conditions change. Today, all the people who work in cabin crew are being retrained because of the coronavirus, so they know how to identify potential cases of coronavirus. We must do exactly the same with public servants.
Lastly, talk to me about the supremacy in as far as policy making is concerned. Where does it reside? Does it reside in the presidency, in your office, and President Cyril Ramaphosa, or in the ANC? What I'm saying is melding those two and marrying those two, because they're not always in tandem, as we can see from the debates that are playing themselves out right now.
Well, our Bible is the medium-term strategic framework, which is premised on the electoral mandate, which was a manifesto. And we were very lucky in this sixth administration, Thulasizwe, in a sense that the colleagues who wrote the manifesto of the ruling party had full sight of what was contained in the National Development Plan. As a consequence, you are able to track the relationship between the manifesto, the NDP, and the MTSF, which is the program of action of this government. So our basic, reference document is the MTSF, and will be implementing because we have read the manifesto, and all we know that there is a correlation between what is contained in the manifesto as what is contained in the MTSF, and therefore that is our base document.
All right, Busani, thank you so much, and all the best with the National School of Government. We look forward to a fresh cohort of public servants who will have gone through your hands. Hopefully they'll be serving us quite well in the years to come. Busani Ngcaweni, thank you for that conversation. After the break, I speak to Lindiwe Mazibuko, speaking to me about the work of her apolitical academy. Stand by for that.